You know what really makes us mad? Is wasting money on CDs with only one or two good songs.
Yeah. Tell them about punk.
What's up, posers? Welcome to Punk Lotto Pod. I'm your co-host, Justin Hensley.
And I'm your other co-host, Dylan Hensley.
And this is the show where we assign our guests a year and they choose one punk, hardcore, emo, or punk-adjacent album from that year for us to discuss. Today is a doozy. We've been waiting for this one for a little bit. A couple of reschedulings that we finally got it to happen. We are talking with Dan Yemin and Andy Nelson of the band Open City. Also, many other bands.
Yeah.
You know Dan from the likes of Lifetime, Kid Dynamite, Paint It Black.
Andy's also in Paint It Black.
As well, yes. As well
Andy
as Ceremony.
Ceremony, yeah.
And Dark Blue.
Yeah.
And yeah, they've both been around making music. So Open City is the current project that they work on together. So that's a absolutely killer band. They just released a brand new song called Wolf, which is probably the song that I'll play leading into the interview. But what else are we talking about today?
We are talking about the year 1998, and the album is The Fine Art of Original Sin by Ink Dagger. We also spend a lot of time talking about a lot of different bands.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a really good conversation. I wasn't quite sure how long we would go on Ink Dagger, and we went pretty good length. So this is a fun one. I'm very happy that this came together. You can also hear a little bit more from us over on the Patreon. That's patreon.com/punklautopod. This week we're doing a starting 5 on other albums that came out in 1995. So stay tuned for that.
1998.
It's a starting 5 in 98, not a starting 8 in 95. And then you can follow us on all forms of social media: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter at punklautopod, punklautopod.substack.com, punklautopod@gmail.com, voicemail 202-688-PUNK, and I believe that's everything. So enjoy this conversation with Dan and Andy. First thing I'll do is ask you each to say your name, just so the audiences can tell who's talking when their voices start. So, Andy, I'll let you go first.
This is Andy.
And Dan?
Hey, what's up? This is Dan.
Awesome. So right now we have one half of Open City, and after some schedule adjustments, a couple times actually, we have finally been able to book a time where we could all talk about a fun record. Before we get into that, though, so Open City is sort of a super group, as much as you would call this kind of band a super group. More like career musicians all working together. So you've all kind of made names in punk and hardcore scenes by playing like various projects, and naturally it kind of makes at least the listener wonder, like, how did everyone find time to start a band with like everyone in their different points in life and parts of the world, country?
I mean, one could say we had no choice. I would say that the irony is that I think it was originally like one of the original, and I'm interested in Andy's perspective on this because I'm sure it's different, but one of the original premises was like, yo, we need to be in a band where everybody lives in Philadelphia and we can practice every week. I mean, I'm sure the joke was on us for even saying that out loud at some point, but I think that was one of the original premises of the band.
Yeah, it was sort of born out of a couple things, one of which was that, like, Dan and I were playing in a band, Painted Black, for a long time together. And I mean, I don't want to speak for Dan, but I think enjoy the sort of kinship of making music together. It's been pretty fruitful, both in terms of the music and the friendship. But due to sort of like, you know, like a drummer who moved to California and toured all the time, and just sort of like some of the other elements of a band that has existed for a long time, I think we were both interested in doing something that was a little more like kind of in a sense casual, but also in a sense like more serious, like practicing once a week, writing together, just playing shows all the time, being able to play DIY shows in Philly. And you know, if a cool band's coming to town, we could just hop on the show and play first, and it would be cool. And like with Painted Black, it was always like, you know, for us to play a show, it took months of figuring out schedules and that kind of thing. But of course, as Dan mentioned, that, you know, best laid plans, yada yada. But I think one of the other
first, it took us 2 years to find a singer. Well,
right. It took us years of I mean, we recorded a whole album without a singer. And then I don't know, whatever. But I think one of the other elements was that we just really wanted to play with Chris Wilson, the drummer.
Yep.
And we had been sweating him as the Pharmacist's drummer, playing with Ted Leo, I mean, for as long as he had been doing it. I mean, Dan and I would go see Ted play and just like be standing like next to the stage, basically as close as we could get to the drums without it getting weird. And just with like our mouths agape, just like, holy fucking shit, like this guy is like amazing. And you know, Chris, I'm very fond of saying this might be apocryphal, but I think like I'm fond of saying that he only owns like 3 t-shirts, and it was like Void, Econochrist, and Die Kreuzen. And so through various things,
was also the
and so through various things, both that, and then I played like in a cover band with him called TV Casualty that Dan did one of the shows with when we performed as Black Flag. I never thought that Chris would be down to it. He just seemed like he was, you know, like on another level from us, but
out of our league.
Yeah, exactly. And so somehow Dan and I brought it up to him to be like, hey, would you ever want to do a band that sounds like the 3 shirts that you own? And somehow miraculously he was, and so we got to work. But it took years until we found a singer. We went through probably like a half dozen people who were like regularly practicing with us, and then we realized
most of whom were pretty remarkable.
Yeah, all of them were, I think. I mean, you know, in their own right.
I mean, everyone who came to practice on a regular basis is and was remarkable.
Yeah,
and have continued to do remarkable things. And then, you know, Rachel was just like, oh, like we were familiar with her from her work in like a ton of New York bands, and kind of like dawned on us that she had moved to Philadelphia. And we were like, what about Rachel?
Yeah. But that was another one where it was like, man, if we could only get her, it would be amazing. And then somehow we did. And it goes without saying that she's our favorite of any of the people that, at least for this band anyway. So yeah. But yeah, it was never really conceived of as like a side project or like a super group, kind of the opposite of both of those things, actually. I think it was sort of meant to be, something that was a little more like serious and real, but also sort of like not capitalizing on, the people's names involved and that kind of thing.
I'd say it was born out of a need for consistency combined with like a Christmas list of like people we would love to play with.
Yeah.
To speak to that thing about Chris, like we're both really big Ted Leo fans, in terms of the him as a songwriter and their recorded out their discography. But like we would go to see him perform, and then people would be like, oh, how was it? What did he play? I'd be like, I don't know, man. I just watched Chris play. I don't know I have no idea what the fuck was on the set list. So I was just like watching like our own punk rock Keith Moon just like go at it for like an hour and just in awe.
Yeah, Chris has that sort of like indescribable thing that like almost that very few musicians and even fewer drummers have, which is just like a distinct style. Like he's got style for days. Yeah, he's the best. I wish his beautiful face was sitting on this tranquil park staircase that we're all typing on right now.
I look like a ghost on this thing because I'm outside and I'm on a swing. So I'm like totally blacked out and kind of moving back and forth.
Well, I'm in a closet, so
sick.
We're both in weird places. Anyway,
so that's the story.
Yeah, I was gonna say like the idea of a super group is always kind of funny to me because like I don't think any band that would be called that has ever been like, we're gonna start a super group with all of our famous friends. Maybe that, what was that one, Chickenfoot, that band, Sammy Hagar and like, was it Joe Satriani and
Nope. No, thank you.
You might be surprised at how depraved some of the members of the punk world are, but to me that shit just smacks of like marketing, and like it's it also backfires too, because you're putting ideas into people's heads about what it's going to be, and then you never get to be what you really are.
Yeah. So one of the things about Open City that whenever you first kind of came on kind of out of nowhere, because I feel like the record was dropped, and I assume you played Philly shows, but like the greater musical scene was probably not really aware of that band. But one of the things that we saw in some of the notes that you put out was that Sarah Kirsch was like a really big influence on the group. And Dylan and I are absolutely massive fans of like every band she was ever involved with. Like we love everything she has done. I'd probably call her my favorite just individual musician ever.
Sam.
And so what is it about her that specifically kind of plays into Open City's DNA?
Well, long pause. That's a hard one. A lot of, Andy, you want to start on this one? I'm trying to find the right words.
I let that pause go as long as it did because I thought as the guitar player I should defer to you. I mean, I don't know, like I'm fairly certain I only ever saw one Sarah band live, actually. It was the last one, which was like a really great show, and in retrospect like a really heartbreaking one, because I don't know, like you guys have probably read about the Mother Country Motherfuckers LP, right? That it was meant to be like a double LP, like Zen Arcade style, like, and just the kind of like brilliance conveyed, like in terms of the themes and just like the sounds and all the stuff that was going on, but making something that was still just so at once like a piece of art that's great and like genuinely affecting, but also like purely punk. Like there was nothing else you could define it as. And the fact that her life was cut short so tragically early. I don't know, like she died the same year as David Bowie, and I remember writing something for a website about how, you know, all the year-end stuff I was reading was about how, like, you know, Bowie died at the top of his game and, you know, had left this, like, you know, seemingly like supernatural album behind. And I personally felt like, and I'm a huge Bowie guy, like he's like, you know, top for me. But I remember just reading all that stuff and being like, you motherfuckers need to be talking about Sarah Kirsch. Because to me, like that, yeah, I remember getting the Mother Country Motherfuckers record and just walking around New York City and just like listening to it on repeat and being like really genuinely affected by it. But I mean,
it's perfect.
Yeah, but and you can say that about John Henry West, Torches to Rome, Beta Brains, Please Inform the Cat, like all that stuff.
Yeah.
Cool. And yeah, I mean, you know, I think she showed a path forward in a lot of ways, you know, on top of just being like a preternaturally gifted musician and performer. I mean,
and brought things together, like these elements from like 80s hardcore that, you know, that to me made perfect sense, but I think brought together worlds that, you know, might not have been in contact with one another. And that might sound like cryptic or vague, but I remember, so this, for me, it starts with this really formative experience, which is like summer 93, the night before we were leaving for the second Lifetime tour. We saw John Henry West play in a basement in New Jersey, and it was, the adjectives are sad and pale compared to what the experience felt like, but, you know, incendiary, catalyzing, life affirming. But I remember thinking, and this is definitely not a cool thing to say, but it's just what I thought. I'm like, this is like if Swizz and Chain of Strength had a baby, and like it was this band that I'm watching like take the paint off the walls in my friend John's basement. And like, I just, you know, we still talk about it to this day, that show. I don't even remember who else played, but I remember where I was standing. I remember everything. And then we left for tour like the next morning, and it was like, that was the fuel for the whole thing. And Kirsch was just an amazing guitarist. And, you know, even in like John Henry West, which is like a fast band, there was like, even then there was like that Fugazi influence in there in this kind of barely perceptible way, which is another great thing to infuse, like, to take fast hardcore and infuse it with that you know, I feel like it took like fast hardcore and infused it with this like Revolution Summer kind of thing that, you know, I think was really hard to do, and I've been trying to pull off ever since in this kind of secondhand way, I guess.
Yeah, it's a sound that like only every once in a while do you get a band that even really comes close to doing it. Like, and then some bands will cite reference the Revolution Summer as like, you know, what they're going for, but none of them, like most of them don't hit it in that same way. And like every single project Kirsch was in, like from the Skin Flutes all the way, you know, up to, you know, Please Inform the Captain, you know, like there's, or whatever, you know, everything she did was this, I don't know, I get an energy out of those records that she made. And there's a vast discography in the sense that we have like close to 2 decades worth of music, but even then, like it's kind of scattered across the internet unless you've got everything on vinyl, which I've got a good chunk of it, but not everything still.
Yeah,
it's
I'm
just
missing
like
a few things.
I'm missing a lot of the 7-inches and some of the.
Even before I saw John Henry West, I was jockeying that Sawhorse 7-inch so hard.
Yeah.
And I think that came out the same year, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, they're like right on top of each other, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there was also just the way Kirsch did the whole, like, there was none of this, like, you know, wait for the album to drop and wait for the album to get reviewed and then go on tour to support. It was just like, sometimes I think like the band was, you know, over by the time the record came out.
Yeah.
with some of those bands, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, what Navia Forge was like a 2-show band and then a record. That's it. And
Yeah.
one of my like holy grail type guests that I've never like I want to have on the show, but I don't know that it'll ever happen, is I want to talk to Sean Linwood. He was the lead singer at Navia Forge and an Admiral who put out 2 killer 7-inches too.
Oh yeah.
And like I want to talk to that guy. I want to know where he is, what he's doing, what he's been doing since then, like because he's an incredible vocalist as well.
I had to track down Corey Lindstrom, who was the singer for John Henry West and for End of the Line, because we needed permission to sample John Henry West on the last Painted Black 7-inch, and I couldn't get permission from Sarah, sadly.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to Kent McClard, who put it out, and who put out, it was from the live stuff that was on that John Henry West discography that Abolition put out.
Yeah.
I think that's
Bolt the Door Shut, I think is what it's called.
Door Bolted Shut.
Yeah.
And so McClard was fine with it, but I had to talk to somebody. I had to talk to somebody else, and I got in touch with Corey, and because we were sampling this like in between song Banter, and that was when Corey told me, like, I appreciate you reaching out and asking, but that was actually Kirsch that did all the talking between songs, which was a surprise to me, but it was cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just wanted to ask about her because, we don't really get a lot of guests on the show that really reference them.
It's rare to get to talk with other people who are familiar with her about, because like Justin said, like, it's just one of our, like, has been such an impactful musician and artist to us. Like, just an incredible all-around great guitar player and lyricist and vocalist, and like the collage artwork that she does, the sound collage work that she did, like it's just the whole total package, and the way that she envisioned these songs coming together. Like it wasn't just a song, it was like a whole life story in a song,
Yeah. And so deliberate, but at the same time felt so spontaneous and alive.
That's the thing that I feel like is definitely missing. Like Justin was saying, like bands that maybe reference the like Rites of Spring and Embrace and stuff like that. It's like you get like kind of a Rites of Spring riff, but it doesn't have that immediacy. It doesn't have that, like, it's coming from too thought out of a place. It's not.
Yeah, it doesn't have the soul that you need. Like, I mean, Rites of Spring were like a deeply like soulful, band.
Oh yeah.
Almost uncontrollably so, and that's the part that people miss. Like, it can't just be pure aesthetic. Yeah. There needs to be spirit, and it's easy to say, like, especially when like a codified genre like Revolution Summer or emo or whatever has some kind of like subcultural capital attached to it. You can say like, oh yeah, we're like Revolution Summer style, but that doesn't mean anything.
It just means you have those like little triplet riffs occasionally.
Yeah, the Dag Nasty riffs.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I think the through line, or the connection between them too, is that they've Kirsch's work and like Rites of Spring, I think, are both sound almost like uncontrollable, which most bands just can't do. But
like, how'd you get all that sound to fit in those grooves?
Yeah.
Like the medium of vinyl, which we all know is the best medium for music. Like, the medium of vinyl had difficulty containing what was going on.
Well, they said that a lot about like Happy Go Licky too, where like, I mean, not to digress into a whole Gee thing, but like, I think Happy Go Licky is sort of like the butt of a lot of jokes about like DC. But like, I think people that were around, and certainly Gee, are like, oh no, they were fucking incredible. Like, you had to be there, you had to see it. Like, they never really made a record, and no, they were like an incredible band. And I think that is worth noting when it comes to these kinds of things too. I don't know. It's, sometimes it's tough to capture things on a record. Luckily, the Kirsch records all fucking rip. So we have that.
So we got to start talking about 1998 and the record, because I'm not going to last. If we just, I'll talk to you about Sarah Kirsch like for another entire episode. But I recognize that your podcast has a theme, and we got to go there, or you're going to lose me. Like, so.
Nah, we go on tangents all the time, so that's
All right.
I brought it on too, so
Yeah.
No, yeah, I just don't want to I don't want to duck out and you're like, hey, I think we're supposed to talk about this album.
Yeah, let's get into the rest of the show then. So the premise of this show is we assign our guests a year, and they choose one punk, hardcore, emo, or punk adjacent record from that year for us to talk about. So we gave you the year 1998. And before we get into the record you chose to talk about, what else came out that year that you almost considered talking about?
I got a whole list if you want me to go down it, Dan. I prepared.
Yeah, I remember End Hits was one, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
That would have been a contender.
Yeah, there was like an Unwound record that year.
Yeah. Repetition?
I think.
Challenge.
Oh, Challenge. Okay,
Challenge.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Everything it's a contender.
That second Drop Dead record came out that year. Dillinger 4 record came out that year. His Hero Is Gone. I have a bunch of other more kind of obscure things as well, including the second I Hate You 7-inch, which is another big Philadelphia record. But like Life's Halt put out a classic record that year. Death Threat did. The good Death Threat, not the other one. Code 13 put out a record that year that was amazing. H100s, Talk Is Poison, Judgment. Like there were a ton of like really great, like small, like quote unquote smaller, DIY.
What did you say right before Death Threat?
What'd you say?
What did you say right before Death Threat?
Code 13 or Life's
No,
Halt?
that was after. Life's Halt. Which Life's Halt record?
Sold Our Soul for Hardcore, the best record of all time.
That's perfect.
Yeah. And like it but there were also a bunch of like kind of punk adjacent 98 was a kind of a big year. Like the first Jets of Brazil record came out, and the Orchid 7-inch, and you can't forget What Happens Next put out their first record that year, which started a whole long multi-year thrash trend that was pretty fun, but not really that well remembered now, I guess. But yeah, there was a ton of it was a big year, I think, for a lot of people. And we should also say that I think Dan put out a record that year too.
Absolutely.
Is that true?
Kid Dynamite. Which one was it? Is it
the first one? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that did come out in 98.
And it's funny because I remember buying that record. This is a good segue, because I remember buying the wrap your head around this, Dan. I bought the Kid Dynamite LP from Phil Leone at an R5 show, like the band R5, somewhere in Pennsylvania. I bought that record and the Locust LP, which also came out like the same week or something, the first record.
That's weird.
And was very excited to get both of them. And I had them in the van as we drove back to like Philadelphia. And while I was on the way, I got in kind of like a weird like high school kind of like fight with my girlfriend at the time about how I went to this punk show instead of like hanging out with her, because it was Halloween. And later that night, I was supposed to go see who play Stalag 13? Ink Dagger. But because of the fight we got in, I did not go, and instead I went out to like some cafe with my girlfriend to try and smooth things over, which I don't think I did. And in retrospect, I should have just gone to the Ink Dagger show.
That was a bad choice.
But then the next day I spent listening to the Kid Dynamite record and the Locust record back to back, and it kind of helped a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, 98 was strong. Like there's a lot of really, really great records that year.
Yeah.
Dylan and I, we have a Patreon, and we're doing a starting 5 where we each just pick 5 records from that year to like talk about kind of briefly. And like going through it, I was like, I wound up with like 30 picks, and I was like, well, clearly I have to narrow this down to 5. And I'm like, okay, let me pick styles. Like I have to get a style down.
Yeah, this is a year where we could just for a frame of reference, I'll say looking at the Rate Your Music charts, I was on page 5, and that's where Over the James by a Veil shows up. So like that's the kind of year that we're talking about, how deep it goes as far as like big records.
Yeah, I guess it was a little bit of that, like, punk blew up 94 for mainstream audiences, and so then like the more independent DIY punk scenes had to go harder and like push these boundaries even more. And it's just like a lot of different styles. Like we have heavy stuff, melodic stuff, like jangly, just really cool variety of records in 98. So yeah, I'd say it'd be a tough year to just narrow it down to one. So
We did it though.
you did. You narrowed it down, and the record you actually chose for us to talk about, it is Ink Dagger's The Fine Art of Original Sin. Couple stats, as I like to call them, about the record. So Ink Dagger were a Philadelphia, Pennsylvania band. This was released on Initial Records. The personnel is Sean Patrick McCabe on vocals, Don DeVore on guitar, Joshua Brown on bass, and Ryan McLaughlin on drums, as well as some additional vocals on We Live Despite Their Schemes and Vampirefastcode version 1.5 by Jennifer Lane Park.
Any jams.
And there's a remix of The Fine Art of Original Sin by J Smooth and JG. And it was produced and engineered by Eric Horowitz at Meat Locker Studios in Philadelphia. So I always like to ask our guests, what made you choose this record specifically to talk about?
I mean, isn't it obvious?
I mean, yeah, I think we were looking over the list. We internally were discussing at great length, like all of the records that we just talked about. And, we were thinking about Lungfish or Fugazi or, Dillinger 4, Veil, stuff like that. But it seems like for a number of reasons that as a Philadelphia band, it's only right that we talk about the best Philadelphia band of all time, Ink Dagger, who, were transformative for the city and for, certainly for myself and for lots of other people.
Yeah, no doubt.
And but I also think that there's a lot more like interesting stuff to talk about with the Ink Dagger record that maybe, I mean, I don't know, how many times can people say that Fugazi are great? Like there's like, what's the point? Right? But and they are, of course, but yeah, I mean, Ink Dagger is kind of a weird band in general, and I think we love to spin our wheels and flap our gums about them, so that's why we picked it.
Yeah, we probably had as many geographic conversations about Ink Dagger as we have about Sarah Kirsch. Just we've gone on and on about how they were the coolest thing to come out of Philly and how no band sounded like that ever, and they just fused influences there that were at once like immediately familiar and recognizable, but also just like all over the map, and put them together in a way that was kind of hard to describe.
Do you guys like the record? Are you familiar with it? Do you know it? What are your takes on Ink Dagger and on their first album?
Dylan, you go first.
So I think I've just heard more things about Ink Dagger than I've really spent time listening to Ink Dagger. Like I've probably heard more like just like stories and like people talking about like their whole like image and that stuff definitely overshadows what they actually sounded like and what they actually did musically, I feel like, as far as like my personal previous knowledge. So I never really spent much time with them until doing it for this show. So another classic record that I have to admit that I didn't know, which is, it's really funny that we're the hosts of this punk show and there's so many records that I've never actually listened to.
So it turns out you guys are just posers.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we actually start every episode where I call everybody posers. So yeah, that's
I love that.
Yeah, it's funny. Our blind spots are kind of embarrassing sometimes, especially whenever, we admit this is a punk podcast. So so I guess maybe I have actually listened to them more than you, Dylan. Yeah,
which is also ironic because this is absolutely, like, musically, this is like way more in my wheelhouse than yours. I feel like.
Yeah, so they're, I guess, kind of like, yeah, like you said, the stories or I guess I was kind of like even introduced to them as like, oh, it's the band that the guy from Tim and Eric was in before he did the show. And like, I guess that's how I first came. And they were like a vampire band. That was the other thing that like I knew about them before I listened to them. I think I've listened to this record before. I feel like I have. It's not one that I spent a ton of time with, but it is something that I had listened to, as well as the record after this one. So yeah, like I knew who they were and what they sounded like, but like I hadn't like analyzed this record like the way I did, kind of getting ready for this one. Ultimately, it's a great record. Like it feels very 98 in the sense that like there's a lot of bands who did things like them or tried to do things like them, but couldn't at all like pull off, I don't know, the energy or like the soul, like we were talking about earlier, that they have. My cat is clawing at my door right now, so I'll be right back. You guys can keep talking.
Scratching at your window. Yeah, I was just curious because I only asked because I feel like one of the things that I personally like about Ink and Dagger and liked at the time and continue to like, and I don't know how you feel about this, Dan, but like, I'm a firm believer in like the punk everything, or what we do is secret kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And Ink and Dagger kind of was and continues to feel like something that like is Philadelphia's and Philadelphia's only. I think You Left Town or whatever, and people be like, isn't that like vampire band, like even at the time? And it was hard to explain to people, like you're like, well, yeah, but it's sort of tongue in cheek. It's also kind of a metaphor. It's also like sort of performance art, but it's also, it's like all these things, but also they're like, their shows are the craziest shows you've ever been to in your whole life, and also the biggest shows, like, and all this stuff, and it all kind of tied together in this really, interesting and unique way that was really hard to explain to people outside of it. And so I don't know, like, it's impossible for me to know what it's like if you're listening to their album, which is also, like, it should be noted, like a kind of weird album in terms of how it's sequenced and what the songs are and all that stuff. It's not a normal thing, I have no way of knowing like how that translates to people who don't have any of the context or whatever. But I also think that, one of the things that is great about punk is that there are all these like contextual situational elements to like shows and bands that like you have to be a participant in order to fully understand. You can't just like consume an MP3 from your desk and like get it. And that's not to say that, the record isn't amazing and whatever. I'm always just curious, like what people think when they're checking it out for the first time or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. How do you feel about that, Daniel?
They definitely had like the what we do is secret kind of component. It's a good call because there was something about it that was like really mysterious in a way that like was partially calculated, but also partially just like like there's definitely like there was a calculated air of mystery to them, but there was also some like release the bats shit going on when they played live that you can't calculate, and that was like not a thing you could replicate or explain. Like the records didn't really do it justice, and like trying to tell people outside of Philly about it was like just a fool's errand, really. You had to see it. And people had a lot to say about them that had never like seen them play, just because of like there's a lot of mythologizing going on, some of which was the band's own doing, and some of it was just sort of like a phenomenon that took on a life of its own, I guess. That makes any sense? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean,
sounding like a crazy fanboy, or just like a
no,
like I'm writing a dissertation.
I think you're right. Like, and I actually never really, ironically, I've thought about this band more than most bands, but I never really thought about how the language and the kinds of like they basically gave people a certain kind of permission to be crazy, you know, like their first song they ever released, the refrain is "Devil Children Unite," and if you were at the shows, you were a devil child, and it was like they gave you this sort of permission under cover of darkness to just be a lunatic. And so I think that might have something to do with like why the shows were so crazy. You know, they gave you a name by being there, and we're saying yes, like we're doing a thing together, and it's going to be insane. And you know, they utilized all kinds of like slogans and like secret codes and, you know, acronyms and all sorts of things that like drew you in, because a lot of the time, I mean, most of the time they didn't explain what it meant, you know, like they would put stuff on their flyers that would be like referring to the SPS, which stood for Scorpiatic Power Sound, and that was like a way that they referred to themselves, but like you didn't know what that was. All you saw was like the SPS will rock you, and you're like, what does that mean? And so you would,
but you wanted to know. That was
of course, yeah, you wanted to be a part of it, because you know they were the, you know, still one of the most like provocative bands I've ever seen. I mean, I imagine it's similar to how people felt when they saw like the Cramps or, you know, whoever. But yeah, and yeah, of course, as Dan said, they definitely mythologized themselves intentionally and understood the power of that stuff and the power of like performance and all that. I mean, you talk about how, you know, you're almost more familiar with the stories about them now than you are the music, but that was even true at the time when they were a band. You know, like there was way more stuff in the culture about them, and rumors and gossip and like all kinds of shit, than there were songs, you know. But they
took it on the road, you know, like they were a collection of, first lineup of that band was a collection of like bonkers human. Yeah. And then they took it on the road, and like, man, did they cause a stir. I don't think they tried to make friends. They just like went out and like made like trying to wreak havoc.
Yeah, but it wasn't like the way that, it wasn't in a conventional like punk or hardcore kind of way. It was more like the stories you hear about like the Jesus and Mary Chain's early shows or something, you know.
Nightmares make me crazy for your kiss. Always dreaming of the apocalypse. Nightmares make me crazy for your kiss. Tortured torment on your torrid lips.
And it seems
it all contributed to it, and they also like tied it all into Philadelphia, you know, like all their songs were about Philadelphia and how living in Philadelphia like fucks you up and turns you into a psycho. And so yeah, I mean, it wasn't really for outsiders, you know, it was kind of for the city.
Yeah.
Dylan, I was trying to remember, like, did we ever have any band like that when we were going to shows? Were there any bands that we were just like, you gotta hear this, you gotta see this band, they were so crazy? I feel like there was some, like there were the bands that you got talked about before you ever saw them, but
where are you guys
maybe
from?
Not really. I mean, I feel like people said a lot about maybe some local bands that then you go see it and it wasn't really that. Like, it wasn't really that impressive. And it was definitely put on more than it was, like, you know, sincerely, like, coming from because Ink and Dagger are just kind of, like, from everything that I've read, like, as far as they have this, like all of the mysterious stuff and, like, the crazy, like, the wildness of their shows, like, is, like, kind of orchestrated, but it also isn't. And, like, because, like, you know, off the stage, they also were, like, lunatics. Like, from what I've read, is, like, from the stories on the road, like, they had a shoplifting game, I think.
Yeah.
Like, when they were on tour, they would just, like, see how much stuff they could steal. They would stop in shopping malls and just steal a bunch of clothes and just compare what they stole. And, like, there's a crazy story about them smashing a vending machine and then getting pulled over by the cops and having to explain why they had a bunch of broken glass and candy in the floor of their car.
Yeah. I'm glad you guys brought that up, because I didn't want to tell those stories and then be told later that I wasn't supposed to tell those stories.
I think those are all on. There's a No Echo article, which is actually funny, like, kind of adding to the mystery. It's part 1 and there's no part 2.
Yeah.
That sounds like Ink and Dagger.
Yeah.
Yeah, I read that. That article's really, really good. Everyone should check that out too, for sure.
That's kind of something Sean would have orchestrated.
Yeah.
So this record specifically, like, you're obviously fans of the band and their ethos and their theatrics, but even just, like, musically, this record rips. Like, it's so good. And Dylan, I think you were telling me you said, like, Refused ripped a lot of stuff off this band specifically, and you can kind of hear that, like, you know, Refused kind of famously known for, like, doing rips of things and taking things from other bands, and
I feel like Nation, they pull from, like, their whole thing was, like, part Nation of Ulysses, part Ink and Dagger.
Yeah.
And then maybe, like, some like aspirational Fugazi stuff.
I do think that there's a little bit of just kind of lateral thinking that happened in the 90s, because, I mean, Frodis had the same kind of theatrical, mysterious, you know, they're, like, secret corporate police or something, and I don't know, Shelby Cinca used a megaphone a lot, and, like, that was definitely, like, a Nation of Ulysses thing too as well. That was definitely a really influential band, I think, in terms of, like, having that sort of mysterious vibe, or, like, being a club that you want other people want to be a part of. I feel like is maybe a good way to describe it. But
yeah, and Ink and Dagger were, like, you know, their primary musical influence, at least in terms of guitar bands at the beginning, was all DC stuff. You know, it was Discord and especially Swizz. So, you know, I have to imagine that, like, Nation of Ulysses were, like, maybe not a direct influence, but, like, you know, that was in there somewhere, I think, in terms of, like, the presentation. It laid the groundwork for them to do something like that in the context of, like, you know, a DIY band, or, you know, whatever you want to consider them, I guess. But
Swizz is definitely a good comparison to make too, because they had the very, like, they were big on slogans too, like, they had the total cool, total power slogan, and they had that sweet logo, and but it was also still, like, extremely raw and just kind of, like, uncontrolled emotion at times.
Yeah, I mean, Don, not to speak for him, but Don for sure was a huge Jason Farrell fan, and like Ink and Dagger played with Blue Tip a lot, when they were a band, and so yeah, that's for sure a musical influence for them. But they were also influenced by all sorts of other stuff that I don't think would have been necessarily obvious to people on the outside, like everything from dance music like Aphex Twin and Square Pusher and drum and bass from the UK and house music and stuff, but also like Spaceman 3 and Spiritualized and Roller Skate Skinny and like some of the like more obscure shoegaze bands that were happening at the time. And all of that's in there. And you can see it a little more on the second LP and some of the singles and stuff. But, it was already in there in that first LP. I'm pretty fond of saying that, like, one of the things that's kind of funny about Ink and Dagger was that, like, if you were an Ink and Dagger fan at the time, you were probably different than like other like popular hardcore bands fans of popular hardcore bands at the time who might be like, yeah, I'm into like Youth of Today and Quicksand, like I like those bands. But if you were an Ink and Dagger, you'd be like, yeah, I really like Aw-Tecker and Roller Skate Skinny. And like, I mean, Sean famously had an Aphex Twin logo tattoo on his arm that was visible like pretty much whenever they played. And yeah, I mean, how many other like hardcore bands in like 1996 can say that? I don't know. I mean, so it was like they were like a very different kind of thing while still being very much part of the scene and like around and playing DIY shows in the same DIY venues as everyone else, which to me at the time was like really like that was meaningful, because I was pretty young and you're used to, like, you don't have a whole lot of experience and you're used to things being a certain way, and then a band comes along doing things the way they did them in that setting. And yeah, it kind of made me rethink like how you can do music and how you can present it and all that stuff. But for sure, like, I mean, they were definitely an influence on Refused. I don't think this is a rumor. Like, Don was also in Refused, I think, after Shape of Punk came out. Like, he was like playing with them for a little while, and I guess they decided to break up, but they also toured with them in Europe and stuff. So they were for sure like an influence on them and many others.
Side note, do we lose Dan?
I see his icon, but I don't see his face.
Because he's not on the call right now.
It shows 3 of 4 in the call, so interesting.
I'm seeing 4, but well, if he's gone, we can make fun of him.
Like, I went to like go chase the cats out of the room because they were fighting each other, so I was like,
I wouldn't be surprised if his phone died or something, so let's just
talking
about it. But yeah, I mean, so yeah, all that stuff was like pretty important, like to the city and the scene at the time, but I think it also like figures directly into what is on the record and why it's like such an interesting thing. And there are a couple other things I want to mention about the record itself, in terms of like, as I think I sort of hinted at before. Oh, sorry, Dan is pausing because his daughter woke up and he has to do dad stuff for a second. Isn't that cute? Folks, he's a good parent. But it's crazy, like the album. Okay, so it's 8 tracks, right? But like a bunch of the stuff, so it's really, in my mind, it's really like 6 tracks. And really each of them, it feels to me like a collection of singles almost, because a lot of these songs were sort of like out there in some way. And the thing that was really crazy, I was looking at this earlier, but I was like, I can't believe that they put a record out every year, like 96, 97, 98, because at the time it felt like a absolute eternity in between the releases. And as a result, like, people that were really into the band, like me, were just dying for like new stuff, because they had, a 5-song 7-inch that came out first, which is probably my favorite record, like my favorite hardcore record, certainly my favorite from Philadelphia. And then they put out a 4-song EP, and there was like one comp track or whatever. But like, you know, when it's like your favorite and best band that's like at the top of their game and whatever, it's like they only have 10 songs. Like, come on. So people were crazy about like, oh dude, they played on the radio in California on tour and I got a tape of it and it has like half of a new song on it and stuff like that. And we should also say, I don't know if this is on like Discogs or anything, but there is oh yeah, here it is. I'm looking at it right now. There's also like a classic canonical live on WKDU set that came out, that was like aired, I think, I don't know, probably 4 months before the record came out or something like that. But they played all the songs off the record, but it's like way more raw. There's, you know, none of the like electronic stuff, and you know, there's lots of good banter and everything like that. And so a lot of these songs, I think there's only like 1 or 2 on the album that you'd never heard before. And I think it was actually maybe just We Live Despite Their Schemes was the only one that hadn't been like released in some capacity before the album came out. And so at the time, it was really interesting to sort of reconcile how you already felt about a lot of these songs with like what they actually were. In the case of Vampirefastcode, their song about downloading stuff off the internet, which is very cool. That's the third version of that song that I had. Like there was like a remix version of it that came out first. That was on some compilation CD. And then there was the live version from KDU. So by the time the album came out, it was like, okay, so this is the third version of it. And, you know, at the time, I thought that was really cool because, you know, it made you reevaluate. I mean, now, like Kanye West will put out 17 versions of the same song in the span of a week. But like at the time, you know, the way people, you know, approached like a punk record was not like that at all. And it sort of, you know, open your mind a little bit about like, you know, how music worked and that kind of thing.
Thank you for calling Dagger Industries. Begin upload now.
Psychosis was already released, like a different version on like a 7-inch that came out the year before. And then of course, I think one of the songs, Cutthroat Tactics, I think has a musical like a reprise of a motif from the first 7-inch musically, which is another thing that's like pretty weird for like a band like that to like take a really sick part and just like have it appear again in another song like 2 years later. I mean, it's weird. It's like it's a pretty weird thing. And so yeah, it was like hearing it finally was like really like you know, it was like a thing that as a fan you just like poured over the record because you knew that these were like the definitive versions of these songs, but you'd kind of already established a personal relationship with most of them, which I'm sure you guys have done that with other things, like bands that you're obsessed with, like hearing like a live tape of something before it's out or, you know, whatever. But with Ink and Dagger, it was like, it was different because the thing on the record is so like meticulously produced and like very sounds that way deliberately, obviously, that it is like a real different thing than like hearing them play like a raw live version or seeing them play the songs live in advance, which they always did that too. Like, you know, there were songs that you knew from them playing live, you know, a year before they were on a record or something. Do you guys have records like that for yourselves?
Yeah, I was trying to think of like specific ones in general. Dylan, you're big with Frodus, like just going down the discography and like hearing every possible like version and take.
Yeah, just the live versions of. I remember getting into Frodus and being like downloading everything, and then just like the last two records are like perfect, like they're incredible sounding, and then like F Letters like really good, but then like the songs aren't produced super well, and then like you get the live versions of some of the earlier stuff that's like such an improvement over like how crappy the original production is on the first record or whatever. And yeah, I definitely, that's one of those, I was thinking about that, just like that's one of those things that it's like you don't see that in bands. Like the last time I remember having like that kind of like feeling about a band where you like is probably the Forgetters, the live bootleg stuff that came out before they had released anything, because they like
there's that Thorns of Life Gilman recording.
That kind of stuff.
Is that the recording with like the computer clicks in it too? Like there's like a Thorns of Life live set from somewhere. I think there's a couple recordings of Thorns of Life, but like there's one that has like clicks in it, whereas like whoever was ripping it like was also doing something else. So like every once in a while you just hear like a little click. But yeah, that was the one I thought of too. Like Forgetters was like we probably downloaded a bootleg of a live show, and then we went to that first Charlotte show they did where like they had nothing officially recorded, and you're like, wow, this is incredible. And then like getting the bootleg of that show, and then like when
you listen to it, like, you actually listened to it because that was all you had, because they didn't. And then they released this the first EP that they did, and it's like, wow, like I know like twice as many songs by them than this. Like I know they have more stuff. Why didn't they just do a record? And then like you waited forever. Like you listened to Hoop and Swan how many times, and it finally shows up on the full length, and it's like, I like the live version better at this point, because that's the one I know.
You're comfortable with it, but it would probably be the other way around, right? Like if you heard the LP first, maybe. Yeah, maybe not. But like, yeah, I mean, I totally know the feel. I mean, I remember I did a show for Thorns of Life when they were, I don't know how many shows they played, but I booked a show for them in Philly at like a house, and yeah, just like the level of concentration that everyone in the crowd had to just like, because you knew you were like getting to hear this stuff that Blake had been working on for like 10 years, and you were like, oh my God, like we're gonna get to hear these new songs. And like after the fact, people were even like talking about individual moments of certain of the songs. They're like, oh, there was that one part where blah blah blah, and it's like, I mean, I think that's the testament of like a really great band where people are that engaged with like the actual music. It's not about like any of the extra stuff. It's about like the songs. And yeah, I mean, when it came to the Dagger, like it was an event anytime a new song came out, and I mean, they put out after there's a stream of like singles, there's a couple splits, there's a couple random comp tracks and stuff, but there's not a whole lot of material. They weren't a band for that long, and I think, I mean, I don't know why it ended as quickly as it did. I mean, they were certainly very active while they were a band, but yeah, like it was a huge deal when they would put out like I remember when they have a split 7-inch with LeShock, and there's a song on it that like they'd played live in Philly a bunch of times, and everyone, like all my friends anyway, were just, that song's amazing, like when is it gonna come out? And then it finally did, and it was like all anyone could talk about, like this one song from this one band. But that was the kind of power they had over the city, and it is kind of funny in retrospect that they really were like their own thing, and I don't think that they, like, people didn't really pick up on like how genius they were until at least outside of the city until later, and maybe not even really maybe they haven't at all, and there's probably a lot of reasons why that is, but I am curious as to why there hasn't been sort of like a comprehensive anthology of their stuff, or you see some of these like emo band box sets that like numero group is putting out or whatever. And it's cool that a lot of that stuff is getting attention and stuff. Like I love Mohinder and like Karate and all those bands, but it is weird there's not like a something like that for Ink and Dagger, because I think if you put it all on an LP, it's amazing stuff.
Yeah, it's funny because like today, the day we recorded this, like there was that botch thing going around about like, oh wow, Sargent House is gonna now be repressing all the botch records. Like they've been repressed like 1 billion times. Yeah. Like why is this
Botch played first of 3 on an Ink and Dagger tour when they were first that was the first time I saw Botch, was when it was like Botch, 9 Iron Spitfire, and Ink and Dagger. Anyway, yeah, but yeah, to your point, you're right.
Though I also think I think that Botch story got blown up because people thought it was saying that Botch was back, like reuniting, and like they had to be like, just so you know, we're not reuniting. This is just new pressings.
I saw that on the train home from work just shortly before recording. I was like, Botch isn't back. It's like, that'll never happen. That's like
never say never, my friend. Ink and Dagger united without their singer,
I mean, Jawbreaker reunited, and that was never gonna happen.
Yeah, I believe that like pretty much everything will happen at some point. All the things that I thought wouldn't happen have happened. So
yeah. But I feel like for a reason to not get together would be because they really hate each other.
I don't know. I mean, Husker Du never did. I mean, they definitely can't now. But like, they definitely genuinely hated each other.
Yeah.
This is maybe like, I mean, we're digressing here, so I apologize, but this is maybe a very cynical read, but I always just think that the only ones where it doesn't happen is either if something like unforgivable happened between the people in the band, or there's just no angle, like the reason you've never seen Inside Out is because there's no angle. Like why would Zach do that? If he wanted to get together with his old band again, he could do the one where they get $10 million a show instead of the one where a couple hundred Revelation obsessives would be I mean, obviously I love Inside Out, but I think that's the thing. But I will say, I should say that the Ink and Dagger reunion was actually great. I was like nervous about it, but they were fantastic. When Jeff from Thursday did, who was like around at the time and like was friends with them at the time and everything, they did a really good job. So
Don actually like worked on a Jeff Rickley record.
Yeah. So
like he must have like already been, talking with them. I wonder if Jeff like talked them into doing it. I could see that being that.
I don't know. I'm not sure how it like I'm friends with Don now. I play in Ceremony also, and we took one of his like newer bands on tour a couple years ago, and like I've known him from around for a long time. I'm not really sure how it came together. I'm sure there's probably an interview about it somewhere, but it made sense that they did it with Jeff. And I think that they did like this warehouse show that I don't know if it was a secret show or whatever before the big like festival that they played at, and it was like pitch black and the microphone didn't work and stuff, so you couldn't really hear him. So there was sort of just like this figure on the stage that you couldn't really hear, but like the crowd was so loud that didn't really matter, and it really did feel like a seance kind of. So it sort of worked for them, and it was like for that reason it was kind of like one of the better reunions I saw. It's like you're this band whose all your songs are about being undead, and you're doing a show with a singer who died, but it's in a pitch black warehouse where you can't hear the microphone, and it really did feel like a ghost was there or something. It was really fucking cool, and they sounded great. But
it's just like how the band Static X is currently going around with a guy wearing a mask that looks like their dead lead singer.
Is that real?
So
that's
weird.
A real thing. That I think it's like the singer of the band Dope is singing for them, but he's got like this metal face mask with like fake hair, like done like Wayne Static, and it's just like, what is this?
Well, there's the fake Smash Mouth singer.
I was gonna say, yeah, I saw the Smash Mouth thing today.
I missed this. There's a fake Smash Mouth singer?
People are questioning whether or not that was actually him. There's a picture of him where he doesn't look right. Like it looks like someone dressed up like him.
Is this like an Andrew WK thing?
Yeah.
Hey, Dan just texted me and he wants me to mention a couple things about the Ink and Dagger record.
Sure.
So he said, here are some things I would mention. I don't know what's going on with his. I feel like this is a long con to advertise what a great father he is, which I think he is. So I can confirm that. But so anyway, he says a couple things. Number one, I had absolutely no memory of the fact that Ryan played on the record, referring to the drummer. I am not sure that Ryan does play on the record. He might play on the record and just didn't play in the live version of the band, like at the time. But Ryan was the drummer of another band that maybe you guys know called Prima, who were on Equal Vision, who have like an incredible record that like no one ever talks about, like a double LP that I highly recommend everyone check out. And he's like an unbelievable drummer. And so yeah, I know that Ryan like played in the band for a little while and for sure played on that Simba record 7-inch that came out before the LP. He probably did play on the record, I'm not sure, but our friend Terry, who recorded a lot of the Ink and Dagger stuff, was like their drummer for most of the time from like when this LP came out till the end of the band. He said that we should mention that. Prima were amazing though, so check them out if you have not.
Yeah, not familiar with that one.
Speaking of drummers, Dan wants to say that the first time, I should connect some personnel here real quick. The first drummer of Ink and Dagger was Dave Wagenschutz, who was the drummer of Lifetime and also the drummer of Kid Dynamite and also the drummer of Painted Black for the first two records. So Dan wanted to say that the first time I saw Ink and Dagger, the wound of Dave leaving Lifetime was still pretty fresh. and then he remembers thinking to himself, damn, Wags upgraded pretty hard. Which like is true. I mean, like, and I think Dave has told me, like, Dave's still a really good friend. I saw him last month. I think he says that his drumming on the first Ink and Dagger 7-inch is still like his favorite drumming that he's ever done. I mean, it's insane. It's like, and I mean, no one was more of a beast behind the drums than Dave at that time. I recently saw like someone uploaded a video of Ink and Dagger playing at Handy Street in New Brunswick, which was like a punk house that I think some of the Lifetime guys, I'm pretty sure maybe Jeff from Thursday lived there too at one point. Like it was a classic New Brunswick punk house. And someone uploaded a video of Ink and Dagger playing there in like, I want to say 96, maybe 97. But it's Dave, it's the lineup with Eric Wareheim and Dave, like the first 7-inch lineup. But they play some songs off the second 7-inch. And most importantly, they play a song from this LP that I guess they were still working on. But it's like a different version of it, and hearing like an alt version of a song that I've heard like infinity times, with like the best lineup of Ink and Dagger performing it, that's like slightly different in the year 2020, was like, I was just like levitating off the ground with joy. I just could not believe it. It's another thing that I would recommend people check out, that live video. I would never encourage anyone to watch like a live video if it was not like transcendent. I kind of hate watching videos of bands playing, but this one is incredible. So to that end, Dan, I guess he was so good at that era and the band was so good at that time that that Dan, I guess, got over his sadness that Dave had quit Lifetime. And then the last thing he wanted to say was that although the record is sick, it is not at all his go-to when he listens to the band. It's still the first two 7-inches for him all the way. And we touched on this, but he said he was always curious about that part that I mentioned, the sort of reprise of the motif from the first 7-inch. He thought it was really cool and took a lot of guts to do something like that. And he always wondered if there was a story about it. He does not answer that. That's sort of non sequitur. But yeah, it was. And, you know, the band at the time just did so much stuff that like took so much guts to do. And as a result, we're just like really inspiring, I think, to a lot of people. A lot of the people that are my age in Philly who are still involved in doing shows or playing in bands and stuff were people who I know were around for Ink and Dagger's reign and who, you know, were turned into lifers by seeing them and being around when they were a band. So yeah.
I wonder too, because like how much of that is the Philly connection, I guess, is what made them such an important band for you and Dan. Because I mean, I don't know. I was kind of young in '98, so like I don't know that I was like aware of what was going on in this specific scene.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know too much about people's like outside of that area, like really thinking about them. But like listening to this record, I'm like, this band is great. They are theatrical and over the top, and the songs are killer. It's like they should be a bigger touchstone or a bigger reference point for people who aren't outside of Philadelphia too, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, Philly's a weird city in terms of like punk history because it's had a vibrant punk scene since the 70s and 80s, but it's pretty short on canonical bands, you know? Like it's not like New York or Boston or LA or even San Francisco or Chicago or any of these places. And there are very few bands that like people outside of Philadelphia would regard as classics. You know, there's like the Dead Milkmen and Why Die and you know, FOD, and after that it's I mean, obviously all the bands me and Dan have done, but
Pagan Babies.
Yeah, Pure Hell, like, you know, there's a bunch, but yeah, I don't know, I'm not sure what it is, but that's kind of what I like about it, and that's kind of what I like about the Ink and Dagger album too in general. I know I kind of touched on this before, but like one of the things that I like about it as an artifact is that for me, my relationship with it is that it serves as proof that like punk and a punk scene are more than just like a record, you know? And in order to get the full experience of it, there's all this other stuff that goes into it. And the record is a part of it for sure. And this one is like an amazing record, but like that's not the thing that's great about Ink and Dagger. You know, it's all the other stuff combined.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's stuff that you can't really translate. That's not something you can really translate unless you experience it for yourself. But those experiences can change the course of your life, you know?
Yeah, I would say I definitely get more out of this band by reading the history of them and like putting it into the context of what was going on musically in this time period, and I can certainly make the connections to like other bands that I am a fan of, you know, that have meant a lot to me, and being like, oh, okay, like so there's kind of some cross pollination that happened here that I wasn't aware of, and that's really cool and brings it to a personal level for me. But I think like, yeah, definitely listening to this record, you know, on its own, completely removed from that context and the story of the band and all of that stuff, it would be like pretty sick record. But
yeah,
maybe that's all I would say about it, you know. But not to say that it's not good, not to say that it couldn't like become more of a regular listening, you know, a record that I would come back to often, but it definitely doesn't hit the same way.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, Dan's back, so I will inform him that we touched on all the things that you texted me. But like Dan, I mean, for me, if I'm going to listen to them, I'll put on the first 7-inch and instantly, as soon as the needle drops, I want to drive a bulldozer through a wall, which is a very common take from people from Philadelphia, I think. But this record is great, and the next record is really great too. And it's a really audacious record from an audacious and great band. Welcome back.
Yeah, that second record is interesting because I listened to it too to get ready for this episode, and I was like, it's very different sounding. Like it's darker, more experimental, not as heavy. I didn't feel like.
No, it's not. But it's like, cool.
Yeah, it's
they were on some other shit altogether by then, I think.
Yeah,
I don't know if I could say what it was, but
ecstasy. There's like a story about like Spiritualized playing the Trocadero in Philadelphia, and everyone who went to the Spiritualized show like becoming like a crazy drug person afterwards. and I feel like that Ink and Dagger record is like a product of that to some degree, because I know Spacemen 3 were one of Ink and Dagger's like favorite bands, so I bet they were at that famous Spiritualized show in Philly. But it's funny, they wrote about a lot of the same kinds of stuff as Spiritualized and Spacemen 3, like big stuff. There was no like youth crew revival style lyrics of like songs about hanging out with the boys and like it like you said you'd never fucking change like 7 different times on a record or whatever. Like Ink and Dagger was writing about like
they were talking about being the changeling.
Yeah, but like they were talking about death, and they were talking about sex and drugs and classic rock and roll stuff. One thing I think that we haven't touched on is how funny they also were. So they were funny too. A lot of the lyrics are tongue in cheek and meant to be a little silly and that kind of thing. But yeah, comparing it to a lot of
Sean was one of the funniest dudes.
Yeah, like the Mandela records all have like prank phone calls at the end of them, like the demo and, and like whatever. And they were, prank phone call masters, those guys.
Did you guys talk about Mandela Strike Force?
No. We should.
No, it's just a precursor band.
I gotta plug in my
computer. Great.
Hang on a second. Ugh. Sorry, we're going long here.
I was looking into the artwork as well. So it was done by this artist named Carlos Batz, who also worked on the artwork for Page 99's document number 5. And I was like, oh, that's like the next progression in like Ink and Dagger's like more sound, I guess, like shifting into like the more screamo direction and the Richmond scene around that time. Yeah, that artwork totally makes sense to me. He also
There was a story at the time that Ink and Dagger spent their entire budget for the record on the artwork. which is like a very them thing to do.
Which, looking at the artwork, it's cool. It's got a lot of, I don't know exactly like what is happening in it. Like there's an eyeball looking through something and like paint, I guess. It's very.
Let's be clear. They were also like an acid rock band. Like in the sense of, in like the punk rock sense of things. There's a few bands I would think of if you were to ask me like in punk rock and punk, like who was acid rock, and this is definitely one of the bands.
The funnier credit I saw from that artist was also Danzig's 777, which is like one of the real bad, like, is it electronic or industrial Danzig records? It's like a photo.
I Lucifer the 7th Danzig record.
Yeah, it's like kind of collagey sort. Well, not. It's an interesting cover. It's like he's got the logo is an odd cover. But that artist also does a lot of like photography too, and this like leather stuff that's on the Danzig artwork is kind of what also that artist has done in their own work. So yeah, interesting to see a connection to Danzig through the artwork on this album.
Yeah. So another thing that, and if you guys discussed this already, just talking about the mystery and the mythology, I don't know if this is deliberate. I don't know whose scheme this is, but when you search them on streaming, their collected works are listed under like 3 different permutations of the band's name. Did you notice that when you were looking up this record?
Yeah, at first I was like...
I went to listen to this one again today and like started typing the name, and the first one that came up was with the plus sign, and I clicked on that and I'm like, where's the album? Like, did it get taken down?
Yeah.
And I had to go search for the album title.
Ink plus Dagger is only the first 7 inches there. And then the LP is under Ink and Dagger and Ink and Dagger. It's actually like Ink and Dagger with an ampersand, and then another ampersand, and then ink, and then the word and then dagger, all one long name. And then there's just Ink and Dagger spelled out, and that's where the second LP is.
And they're mostly the same. It's all says 6 Feet Under record, so it's not like whoever even uploaded it. It's the same person, like the same group. It looks like. So like it has.
I think this stuff was all re-released by another label more recently, and they were just having fun with it in a way that probably Sean and Don would have done. I would imagine if streaming were around.
I used to, before I really ever listened to this band, I also used to get them confused with the band Cloak and Dagger, which is like more like a screamo band, right?
No, they were more of
Cloak Dagger's from Richmond, and they're more on like I would say more of a Wipers kind of.
Yeah.
Like hardcore
like really
kids,
fast.
Hardcore kids doing the Wipers. I don't know. Andy, is that accurate at all?
Yeah, they're like Hot Snakes, Wipers.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They're great though.
They're great.
I did for a long time always mix Ink and Dagger up with Murder City Devils, who did have a record this same year.
That's funny. That's a weird one to mix them up with because they weren't that different as live bands at the time. Like the Murder City shows in like 97, 98 were like also like insane, chaotic, like fire, people, bodies flying everywhere. Yeah, that's funny.
Which I guess they're the West Coast equivalent, because they were a Seattle band. Which
yeah.
I also didn't realize they had members in Pretty Girls Make Graves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. All those like pre-Murder City Devils bands are really great too. If you've never heard them, like the Death Wish Kids and especially Area 51 are like both like totally sick. I remember kind of having my mind blown at the time learning that the Murder City people were all like hardcore kids and not like, Fonzie garage rocker dudes,
Yeah, that was surprising.
But the best show I ever saw them play was like in San Francisco, and they played with that band Dead and Gone, who are like one of my favorites, and it totally made sense. So yeah, it was like not at all like a old timey rock and roll thing. It was like way more intense and chaotic than that.
Here's a weird little rabbit hole. The guitarist from Death Wish Kids was also in Modest Mouse.
Yeah, I think he still is, right, Dan?
Yeah, Dan Gallucci.
You're asking, yeah.
Or at least he was until 2005. I think he was kind of off and on.
Yeah. Yeah, I think he's in that band Cold War Kids too. That guy's busy.
Just out of curiosity, I was also curious what else Initial was doing in 98. And so there's a couple things. The two things I really noticed was they did Boy Sets Fires in Chrysalis EP and the Jazz Junes Breakdance Suburbia 7-inch. But then there's also a Despair EP and a Live Slugfest EP, which are both Scott Vogel bands, which predate Buried Alive and Terror.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's like a Shipping News split with Metro Shifter. So that I didn't know a lot about Initial Records, so it's an odd little collection of bands there.
Yeah, Louisville.
I don't think I've heard any of those. like not a single one of them. It was. I think even at the time it was weird that they were on that label. But
the only thing I'm really familiar with, like listening to myself, is the Boy Sets Fire EP.
Yeah, never heard it. Maybe I'll check it out.
Well, seeing as we're at a little bit at hour and a half here, does anyone have any final thoughts on the record?
I'll let you go first, Dan.
I think it's sick. Andy, do you remember I remember unless I'm totally getting this wrong, the record release show for one of the albums was at the TLA.
Oh, I remember it very well. What's your question?
Was it this record or was it the next record?
It was this record, and I actually was thinking of bringing this up just to sort of, I hate when fucking people are like, things are different now than they were back then. Like, that's like the most fucking banal bullshit of all time. But I did not go to that show because I was like 16 or something and like on vacation with my parents in Canada when it happened. But I knew that that was the record release show for this new like Ink and Dagger CD coming out, right? So I remember like paying a friend of mine to go to the show. He went anyway, but I remember giving him money to buy me a CD and then priority mail it to me on vacation so that I could hear it ASAP, which he did do. I still am grateful for that. But yeah, that was one of the only Ink and Dagger shows besides that Halloween show we mentioned up top that I didn't see like in Philly. And I think it was with Blue Tip and Kerosene 454, right? I think that was the show.
I don't remember who else played. I remember that Don was ambitious and like had like, and I don't mean ambitious like let's make a lot of money. I mean like in terms of like what the scope of like music as art could be. And they had like stuff going, like a lot of audio, like visual stuff going on behind them at this show. Now, I'm wishing you were there because I'm like prone to not remembering things accurately or like remembering one thing from one show that really happened in another show. But I'm pretty sure that they had a big sheet hanging behind them, and they had like Philly graffiti writers like painting behind them while they were playing.
Yeah, there was a. Did you
hear about that?
Yeah, the story I had always heard was that they had a woman at the show like doing paintings like of the show that were sort of impressionistic. And she was like on the side of the stage, and I'm pretty sure that she made like dozens of little paintings during the show. Because I think they also did that at Stalag, because I have this memory that a bunch of the paintings were just like up at Stalag 13 for a really long time, like on the walls and stuff. But it's funny.
I don't remember the details, but I do remember someone painting behind them.
Speaking of graffiti, though, like for people unaware, like Ink and Dagger were kind of like in the graffiti world too in Philly. And I was watching. Yeah. Have any of you guys seen this movie called The Watermelon Woman?
No.
Okay, no. It's this like 90s indie movie, like 90s indie gay cinema. It's like Criterion Collection, This woman made it. It takes place in Philadelphia. It's really, really, really great. And I am embarrassed to say that I was not aware of it until like last year. The movie's amazing. You should check it out. But shout out to Ambrose of Joint Custody in DC for pointing out to me that in the background of one of the scenes, you can see a Sean McCabe graffiti tag in the background of one of the scenes, which like made my heart grow like 10 times bigger at seeing that. So yeah, they had their hands in everything. I guess that's my final thought.
Yeah. And like, I knew Don pretty well, and we lived basically around the corner from each other for a lot of the time. Ink and Dagger was a band, and they had this perfect lineup when they like early on, like the lineup in the first 7-inch, and I had this sense a lot of the time that there were a lot of members throughout the history of the band. I felt like Don was continually trying to recreate like the magic and the quality of that first lineup. And it's one of the things that made the band interesting, because it was always kind of morphing. But it also sometimes just sounded like a really different band in a way that I think like is cool, but also, might have been frustrating for people at the time. I remember, but Ryan was a great drummer, and I still can't remember like the sequence of like where he fell in the order of drummers, but I don't know. It's kind of disjointed, but I just remember like how much the band was shifting and how much it felt like a little bit different on each record. Not just that the writing was progressing, but also that the lineup was constantly changing. And so it's like a snapshot of a particular version of Ink Dagger that's really compelling.
Yeah, even reading that No Echo article with all the interviews, they don't really talk to too many. I don't think they talk to too many musicians. I think they talk more just the people who are around the scene, right?
Yeah.
So even then, like the stories are all everyone's like recollections and like people who weren't directly in the band, which I guess also kind of adds to the mystique of everything.
But a lot of those people were just as important to the band at the time. You know,
Yeah.
They had like this whole crew of extended family and stuff, like people that would go on tour with them, people that were at all their shows, people that would, you know, that were like involved in the band in some way. And yeah, so like all that stuff did sort of contribute to like what the thing was. But as Dan said, like it was constantly shifting, and a lot of times, I mean, it's probably like a lot of other kinds of music that aren't punk really, where it's like you go to see certain people performing the music, and you know their variation on it's going to be different based on who it is, and you know you would go and see them and be extra engaged in the show because you were actually like listening, kind of like what we were talking about before.
Yeah, and not to draw. I mean, I think punk is. I mean, we're still here because I think punk is something magic that transcends just musical style. So I don't want to. I feel like I'm at risk of diminishing it by saying this at the end, but like I think of like the Rolling Stones did one song with Mary Clayton singing vocals, right? And that particular snapshot is like my favorite. Like that's the version of the Rolling Stones that I love. And that's the version of the Rolling Stones I want to hear and that I want to remember and think about. And like almost every, you know, like there's a million songs I could probably name of theirs, but like that's the song where like I'm a Rolling Stones fan. Like, and I don't know, like I think it's cool when shifting lineups kind of create shifting definitions in a way that's, you know, both deliberate and accidental.
I think that's a good point to end. Thank you both so much for doing the show. I didn't get a chance to mention at the top. You just released a lathe of the song Wolf, that sold out like basically immediately, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because we made like 5 of them.
Oh, that's true.
It's not that impressive.
I mean, I saw it 2 hours later and it was already gone, and I was like, oh man, I would have got one.
Dan, you're so bad at marketing. Instantly sold out everywhere. It was gone in a flash.
But the new song was for the American Hardcore Comp. So, like, I guess, is there more plans for Open City, or is stuff in the works, or was that just kind of a song sort of hanging around?
No, we're almost done our second LP. It'll be COVID kind of torpedoed our recording plans because, you know, for obvious reasons. But it's been in some stage of completion for a long time, and hopefully it'll be done soon, and we'll get it out to you all as soon as we possibly can. There's some exciting.
To give you an idea, I was looking through the calendar, and I finished the guitars, I think March 8th, 2020.
Yeah, I did the bass tracks in February of 2020. But that's not the point. The point is that it absolutely rips.
Sorry.
And it will be worth the wait, we promise. Yeah, this song is one of the songs we recorded during the sessions. I'm not sure if it'll actually be on the LP or not. I don't know if we figured that out, but I think we're all really psyched on how it's coming together. It's a ripper, and you know, it'll be out as soon as we can get it out to y'all, and then we'll play shows and all that stuff.
Yeah,
I can't wait for everybody to hear it.
That's awesome. Where can everybody follow you online to make sure that we keep track of that?
We're on all the things, the Open City, THEE, .com, on all the horrible social media platforms, on Bandcamp, all that stuff. Email, you know. You can find us walking around our respective cities looking clueless and uncaffeinated most of the time.
Desperately searching for caffeine.
I'll make sure to include that in the show notes. And last thing we always ask our guests is, are there any charities or nonprofits that you would like to bring some attention to?
I would like to bring attention to the Philadelphia Bail Fund, which is an important one.
Since I'm calling from the West Coast, I will give a shout out to Oakland, California's anti-police terror project. Ceremonies raised a bunch of money for them, and they're doing good stuff fighting the pigs.
Awesome. I'll make sure to include that in the show notes as well. Thank you both so much for doing the show. It was a little tricky to get this scheduled, but we finally got it done.
You got a picture on how things work with us. All right. Thank you guys very much for having us.
Yeah, thank you.